Remove it by tonight or I'll have the grounds crew dump it in the trash. This is an HOA community, not a cemetery.
She had absolutely no idea what she just activated. I stood there holding the phone. My neighbor Linda, HOA board president 3 years running, had just called to tell me the small wooden bench and flower wreath I'd placed at the lake's edge for my wife had been removed. Carol had passed 11 weeks ago. 41 years together. The memorial had been there for 6 days. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Linda kept talking. Something about aesthetic guidelines, uniformity, property values. I heard maybe half of it. I said 2 words. Okay, thanks. She seemed annoyed I wasn't more upset. That should have been her first warning sign. But she didn't know that yet. I drove to the lake. The bench was gone. The wreath was gone. There was a little HOA violation notice zip-tied to a nearby post, like a parking ticket on a gravestone. I stood there for a while, just looking at the water. Carol had loved this lake. Every morning, 6 a.m., she'd walk down here with her coffee. Even when she was sick. Even when walking was hard. This wasn't just a spot to me. This was the last place she felt like herself, and Linda had it cleared like it was a broken lawn chair. I took a photo of the violation notice. I took a photo of the empty ground where the bench had been. Then I went home and I opened a file I hadn't touched in almost 4 years. Something shifted in me then. Not anger. Something quieter. More dangerous than anger. Because here's what Linda didn't know. What nobody on that HOA board knew. What I'd honestly forgotten mattered until that exact moment standing at that empty lake edge. I pulled out the original property deed from when Carol and I first bought this house back in 1987. I flipped to the survey attachment in the back. My eyes found the line I was looking for. The shoreline. 32 feet of it, including the exact ground where that bench had been sitting. It wasn't HOA land. It was mine. I didn't call Linda back that night. I didn't post in the neighborhood Facebook group. I didn't mention it to a single neighbor. I just made one phone call to a real estate attorney named Marcus who'd handled our property matters for 20 years. Marcus, I said, I need you to look at something. That was her first mistake, assuming I had no ground to stand on. Literally. Marcus confirmed it the next morning. The deed was clear. The 1987 purchase included a private shoreline easement running 32 feet along the eastern lake edge. That strip of land, the exact strip where Carol's memorial had stood, was legally mine. Not common HOA property, not shared grounds. Mine. But then something happened that I didn't expect. Marcus went quiet on the phone for a second. Then he said, You know what this also means, right? The HOA's been maintaining a section of your private property for 30 years. The walking path, the 2 benches they installed in 2019, the landscaping along the water's edge. He paused. All of that is on your land. I hadn't even thought about that, he said. They didn't just touch your memorial. They've been treating your private property as common area for decades, and now they've physically removed personal property from your land without permission. I said, What does that mean legally? He said, It means they have a problem, a significant one. I told him I wanted everything documented. Every inch, every year, every improvement they'd made on land that wasn't theirs. I told him I wasn't calling Linda. Not yet. I wanted the full picture first. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, Marcus had pulled the original plat maps, cross-referenced them with the HOA's recorded common area boundaries, and confirmed what we suspected. The HOA had been maintaining, modifying, and controlling private property, my property, without any recorded easement granting them the right to do so. Linda still had no idea I knew any of this. She sent a follow-up email Thursday afternoon. Very formal, referencing HOA bylaws, Section 4.2 Aesthetic Standards, Common Area Regulations. She CC'd 2 other board members. The tone was cold, bureaucratic, the kind of email designed to make you feel small and outnumbered. I read it twice. I forwarded it to Marcus. He called me back laughing quietly. Not a mean laugh. More like a chess player watching the other side make a catastrophic move with complete confidence. She just put in writing, he said, that the HOA takes responsibility for maintaining and regulating that shoreline strip, on record, in an email. Something was now in motion that couldn't be stopped. Marcus filed a formal title assertion with the county the following Monday. It was quiet paperwork. Nobody announces these things. You just file them and let the process move. But that wasn't all. I'd spent the weekend going through 37 years of property records, photos, old tax documents, and I found something I hadn't expected to find. Something that reframed this entire situation. Back in 2019, when the HOA installed those 2 decorative benches along the waterfront path, the ones Linda had pointed to in her email as examples of maintained aesthetic standards, they had applied for and received a minor landscaping permit from the county. Under that permit, they had listed the shoreline strip as HOA common property. That was a false filing. Filed in 2019. With my name right there on the original deed, they could have checked at any time. Marcus went very still when I told him that. That's not just a property dispute anymore, he said. I didn't say anything. That's a false representation to a county authority. That opens up a completely different conversation. I said, I know. Here's what I want you to understand. I didn't want to destroy Linda. I didn't want a legal war. I wanted a bench by a lake for my wife. That's all I ever wanted. But when you take something sacred from a grieving man and do it with that much arrogance, you leave him no smaller move available. That Friday, Marcus sent formal written notice to the HOA board. Not aggressive. Just factual. Property boundary clarification. Request for documentation regarding the 2019 permit application. Request for the return of removed personal property. Linda called me 40 minutes later. The confident voice from before was gone. I think there may have been a misunderstanding, she said. That was the first time I'd heard her sound like a human being. But she still didn't know how bad it was about to get. What happened next, even I didn't fully see coming. When Linda received Marcus's letter, she apparently panicked and called an emergency board meeting. I know this because 3 different neighbors texted me about it. Apparently, she told them it was a routine property matter. Apparently, she did not mention the 2019 permit issue. But one of the board members, a retired contractor named Phil, who'd been quietly annoyed with Linda for 2 years, pulled up the permit himself. And then he pulled up the original deed. And then he called Marcus directly. Phil told Marcus that Linda had been the one to personally sign the 2019 permit application, that she had classified the shoreline strip as common area without doing any title research, that when Phil had raised questions at the time, she'd told him it was already verified. It hadn't been verified, she'd assumed, and then she'd signed a county document based on that assumption. Phil asked Marcus what the exposure was. Marcus told him. There was a long silence. The HOA's liability insurance carrier was notified that same afternoon. I didn't do that. Phil did. Because the board had a fiduciary responsibility and Linda's unilateral action had created a county-level documentation problem that now touched every board member. Linda called me again that evening. This time, the tone was completely different. Can we handle this privately? She said. Between neighbors? I said. You had my wife's memorial removed from my own property. She didn't say anything. I said, we're past private. The full weight of what was coming was now landing on her all at once, and she was completely alone in it because the board had already begun quietly separating themselves from her decision. The HOA's insurance attorney made contact with Marcus the following week. They wanted to settle, quietly, quickly. Linda, meanwhile, tried one last move. She posted in the neighborhood Facebook group that there had been a miscommunication about shoreline boundaries and that the board was working collaboratively with affected homeowners. She framed it like a minor clerical issue being resolved in good faith. Phil replied publicly in that thread. He said the matter involved a formal title assertion and county documentation concerns. He said the board had retained separate counsel. He tagged 2 other board members. Linda deleted her post 20 minutes later. It didn't matter. The screenshots were everywhere. The settlement came through on a Thursday. I'm not going to share the full details. But here's what I will say. The HOA formally acknowledged my ownership of the Shoreline strip in recorded county documents. They issued a written apology, not a form letter, an actual written apology, for the removal of personal property from private land. They returned the bench. It had been in a storage shed the whole time, completely undamaged. And the 2019 permit misclassification, that's being handled through a formal county correction process. Linda signed that permit. Her signature is on that document. Whatever comes from that correction process is between her and the county. She resigned from the HOA board 8 days after the settlement, sent a brief email. No explanation given. I carried that bench back down to the water myself, set it exactly where it had been, put a new wreath on it, sat there for a while in the quiet. Carol would have found the whole thing absurd, honestly. She was never someone who wanted to fight. Neither am I. But she also believed, deeply, that some things are worth standing still for, even when it's hard, especially then. If something like this ever happened to you, someone using bureaucracy as a weapon against your most personal moments, what would you do? Drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know, and if this story meant something to you, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot. There are more stories here. Real ones. The bench is still there. Linda is not.